Hi, everyone. Welcome to WION Live broadcast co-production with Voice of America. I'm your host, Susan Tehrani, and I'm coming to you live from New York City. We begin with concerns of the rise in anti-Semitism worldwide and the response from Washington. The Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th and the resulting war in Gaza led to a dramatic increase in anti-Semitism worldwide in 2023. In the United States, the Biden administration recommitted to the security of Israel and the safety of the Jewish community. Natasha Mozgovaya has the story.
This ancient hatred of Jews didn't begin with the Holocaust. It didn't end with the Holocaust either.
At the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum's annual remembrance ceremony at the U.S. Capitol, President Joe Biden had a message for American Jews and the State of Israel.
Let me reassure you, as your president, you're not alone. You belong. You always have and you always will. And my commitment to the safety of the Jewish people, the security of Israel, and its right to exist as an independent Jewish state is ironclad, even when we disagree.
The Anti-Semitism Worldwide Report for 2023, published Sunday by the Anti-Defamation League and Tel Aviv University, revealed a 103% increase over the previous year in acts of violence, vandalism, and harassment targeting American Jews.
Unprecedented levels of anti-Semitism engulfed Jewish communities in capitals all over the planet. It was the worst year for anti-Jewish hate in America that we've ever seen since we started doing this work 45 years ago.
According to the report, nearly 3/4 of American university students have witnessed an anti-Semitic incident in some form since the beginning of the academic year. Many pro-Palestinian protesters, however, insist they are not anti-Semites. Zoe Reagan is a pro-Palestinian protester at the University of Washington in Seattle.
We have a lot of Jewish students amongst the organizers here. This isn't about anti-Semitism. This is about being staunchly anti-Zionist, because there are people who are being displaced from their land and exterminated with U.S. taxpayer dollars.
Noah Tishby, co-author of the new book Uncomfortable Conversations with a Jew, says the term Zionism, which simply indicates Jews' right to their own home in the land of Israel, has been hijacked and demonized.
There's nothing wrong with criticizing Israeli government policies. That is not what is happening on campuses in America right now. They literally say resistance by all means necessary. They are praising October 7th. These people are calling to take down the single Jewish state in the world.
Tishby says while Biden's staunch support does make the community feel safer, it doesn't take away her conviction that another Holocaust could happen again if hateful trends are left unchecked.
October 7th felt to the Jewish community like a repeat of the Holocaust. When we heard the same stories of mothers hugging their children while they're being burnt alive, and children and teens and kids hiding in cabinets, and decapitation and mutilation and rapes, I call it the atrocities of October 7th and the atrocities of October 8th. Because October 7th happened, and it took a little less than 2 hours for the anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, anti-Semitic organizations to start praising it.
She says that anti-Semitism is also often an indicator of the presence of deeper problems in a society, and that seeking a scapegoat rarely stops with one group only. Natasha Mozgovaya, VOA News.
Joining us now with additional reporting is VOA correspondent Jessica Stone. She's live at the White House. Jessica, great to see you. So the center of protest against Israel's prosecution of the war has been college campuses. It's graduation season for those students. How are U.S. college administrators handling all of this?
Well, there's a variety of ways they're handling it, Susan, but some commencement ceremonies are being canceled. Others are just being scaled back. At Columbia University, for example, they're limiting the graduation ceremonies just to the individual colleges where people get their majors as opposed to a campus-wide event. At Rutgers University, they've chosen to negotiate with the protesters, asking them to remove their encampment in exchange for creating an Arab American cultural center. And so that's another tactic being used. But the rationale for school officials has really been along the lines of preventing more violence on their campuses. They're concerned that these protests have at times become violent, and these students are continuing to ask Washington to stop funding Israel's war, as well as get more humanitarian aid to Gaza. And they're also asking for cutting ties with Israeli businesses, which, as we've discussed earlier, is a very complicated request to comply with. And so the negotiations along those lines don't favor the protesters, in the sense that it's very difficult for colleges that have funds that are invested across the businesses of the world, primarily big technology companies like Google and Cisco that have businesses in Israel or do business with Israel, to completely divest from those funds. And so that's an ongoing conversation. And what we've seen is that the conversation, when limited just to specific companies or specific funds, it makes it much easier to have that conversation between the university and the protesters.
And this week, the Biden administration paused the shipment of some weapons to Israel. How are Americans reacting to this decision?
Well, the Biden administration did warn back in April that the U.S. would condition military aid based on how Israel was prosecuting the war in Gaza, specifically with relationship to preserving the lives of civilians. Progressives in Biden's Democratic Party have very much come out in favor of his decision to delay these arms shipments. Republicans, on the other hand, have said, look, we didn't have a U.S. presidential election where voters came in asking their president to basically manage a war for another country. Human rights groups have accused Israel of violating humanitarian law. And we should add that the Biden administration did miss a Wednesday deadline to report to Congress whether taxpayers are funding actions by Israel that violate humanitarian law. So we'll have to see what they come out with in that respect when that's released, hopefully in the coming days. Susan?
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. I want to turn now to a story that you produced this week about a U.S. national security issue in the Pacific. Please stay with me. Last year, Congress called for an investigation into 100 reported incidents of Chinese nationals attempting to enter U.S. military bases and other sensitive sites around the world. Officials on the island of Guam, which hosts some of the most strategically important U.S. bases in the Pacific, say that they too are at risk and are asking for help in protecting their shores. VOA's Jessica Stone reports.
Construction crews are hard at work on the strategic U.S. territory of Guam. By 2028, Washington will spend $9 billion to relocate U.S. Marines from Japan, build an integrated missile defense system, and add command functions for the Army, Navy, and Air Force. Guam is the closest U.S. territory to Asia, and its military installations form a critical component of American defense strategy in the Pacific.
As our buildup happens, the Chinese are trying to hold it at risk through new capabilities, and we're responding with more missile defense.
More missile defense, but not additional border defense. A Guam Customs spokesperson tells VOA the agency has 140 officers to enforce immigration and customs, with no additional staff to patrol the 125 kilometers of shoreline. Since 2022, at least 118 undocumented Chinese migrants have been caught entering Guam illegally. While almost all come to find jobs or file for asylum, Guam delegate James Moylan says the fact that they're getting in is cause for concern.
Guam is so strategically important. We're so small. We should be able to control our borders and our legal Chinese migrants from not coming in.
Moylan wants Congress to allocate an additional $5 million for more immigration agents. He also wants Washington to close a program allowing Chinese nationals to come visa-free to Guam's neighboring island, Saipan.
If we're putting all this billions of dollars into the military buildup, but yet we're allowing small groups of Chinese migrants to come land on our shore, that's all that probably could be necessary to disturb the disruption in communication and the defense for the people of Guam and for the nations.
Asian American advocates caution against racially profiling those of Chinese heritage.
I think the issue of stereotyping and over-inclusiveness into certain definitions of who may migrate who can buy property, who are subject to these regulatory attempts, it is a cause for concern.
But Shriver says Guam's role in U.S. national security is too important, and issues like border security must be part of the conversation.
Guam would be critical in virtually any contingency in the Western Pacific, but if you look at its proximity to Taiwan and you look at the types of support Guam would provide, it's absolutely critical as we're currently postured.
Shriver says the cost of not being concerned could be a breach of national security or the security of U.S. allies. Jessica Stone, VOA News.
Jessica, thank you for staying with me. Chinese migrants are also coming across the U.S. southern border with Mexico, a cause for concern among many voters. What do we know about their motivations?
Yeah, so the Border Patrol says 37,000 people of Chinese national heritage came across the southern border just last year. That is 10 times more than came the year before. In terms of their motivations, it's pretty widespread. Of course, the economy in China has not bounced back as quickly as the U.S. economy after the COVID-19 pandemic, and low-wage workers in particular are looking for work and are coming to the United States to do that. But also, during the pandemic, visas for Chinese citizens were much more difficult to get than they are now, so that process, part of the process has eased up. And asylum claims for Chinese citizens are actually at a pretty good rate. 55% of them are approved. So we know that these Chinese nationals are actually seeking out immigration officials instead of trying to evade them, according to U.S. officials, and trying to get the asylum process started. Many of them also claiming religious persecution, carrying crosses and Bibles, and making the argument that as Christians they are persecuted by the Communist Party of China. The path that many of these Chinese migrants are taking has also gotten easier because Ecuador is allowing Chinese nationals to come in visa-free, and so they can get in through Ecuador and take a trek through South and then Central America up through the Darien Gap into the United States. Meantime, Chinese cartels are operating at full speed, charging something like $10,000 or $20,000 for one of those trips for Chinese migrants to come to the United States. Susan?
Oh, wow. The southern border continues to be a key political issue, of course, in the U.S. presidential election. How is the Biden administration responding to the record numbers of crossing there?
Yeah, so asylum can typically take around 3 or 4 years to get through that process in this country, and it's gotten longer over the last year. What the Biden administration proposed doing this week is a rule that would actually move up some of the security clearance of asylum seekers earlier in the process and deport them immediately if there are any red flags that are raised, such as a criminal record that could be a problem for U.S. citizenship or some kind of terror threat. So those things are being raised earlier in the process so they don't continue to go through the process. Normally they would, even if those red flags were raised. Now they're not going to under this rule, but it is just a proposed rule. It still has to go through the process of approval, and that means it's not going to go into effect right away.
Okay, well, we'll be watching very closely. Jessica, thank you so much for all of those updates. Have a great weekend, and thank you for joining us.
You too.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.